Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm always excited on episodes where I have poets that are willing to stop by and talk with me. There are a number of young adult writers, comics creators, and folks of sort of those leanings that come on, but glad to be talking with North Carolina poet laureate Jaki Shelton Green. May I call you Jackie or Laureate or what would you prefer?
Please call me Jackie. Thank you. And
Okay,
thanks for having me.
my pleasure, my pleasure. We were talking a little bit about your space here, and I love the space that you're in. Those that are watching the video can sort of see this, and I'm just struck by your story of talking about finding the space because you are a person who notices things around you. You notice the bones, the ways that things are made, and I think that's sort of a poet skill in a way, and a writer skill to be an observer of the world and to sometimes look past what might be on the surface and see what's working and churning a little bit more deeply in something.
What a lovely space to start with. Thank you. I am very drawn to history. It's
Hmm.
one of the
Hmm.
containers that I'm dipping in and out of constantly when I'm um, in my creative being space. First of all, I think that we're all creatives and we're all dipping into spaces, even when we aren't aware of it. But when I was looking at the house, I also researched the land. I wanted to know the history of the land, how what was here before this house was here, and
Hmm.
found out that there was actually a linkage to my family lineage, my maternal family
Oh,
lineage
wow.
to this woman. And that was very insightful for me, but also it's energy that attracts me as well, because as a writer, as an artist, I am constantly how can I say that? I am constantly attracted to, I'm constantly responding to energies in spaces. So his house
Hmm.
had a wonderful energy. I felt like it was beckoning me to come tell its story, to come be the next part of its story, to come make stories with it, to create new stories. And I accepted that invitation. And
Hmm.
that's kind of, I'm glad you started with this thinking about houses, because, sometimes when I'm writing, I have this mindset, and it comes from having a history as a dancer in another life. I taught dance, I danced, and writing for me is choreography.
Ah, uh-huh.
But also getting back to the metaphors of the house, I like to think sometimes that, like language is like there's some words that serve as like, what's the flooring going to be?
Hmm. Hmm.
What's going to anchor this room? Is it a couch? Is it a painting? Is it an unusual chair? Um, what is it? Is it a piece of sculpture? So I'm always thinking about the biology of objects and how just organically we connect our artistry to our real life experiences and how we
Hmm.
show up in those real life experiences. So thanks for kind of starting there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and very well said. And it's such a pleasure to share your work in my classroom. I teach right now mostly 10th and 11th grade students, English 2 and English 3. And one of the things that I try to do is look at a range of voices, and I love looking at it, a voice, your voice that speaks to a place that my students know well or that my students can expand into and think about. Praise Song is one of those poems that I use very often.
Yeah, well, when I'm writing, I'm also thinking about who might need this poem. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way, but I know that creativity is medicine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I feel that the artist is always administering healing spaces and ways of people to see themselves differently, or to engage in holding an experience very differently. Um, so I also think about this landscape of the South that I'm very much a daughter of, that I'm very much a product of all of its histories and all of its hopes and all of its futures going forward. And
Hmm.
thinking about those who walked before me and what were their stories and what were their experiences. And how do we, I want to use the word repackage, how do we repackage or uh, offer this to younger generations in ways that they might understand it differently and it doesn't
Hmm.
come off as just historical fact. But
Hmm.
I think it's different when you're studying history and that historical figure becomes someone that you can actually touch, that you know this character. Like
Hmm.
that's my great uncle. I know that character. He's the guy that runs the hardware store. And that's when writing is very powerful and effectual, when people know the characters.
Yeah.
You know, they can go talk to that character. And I find myself often, you know, engaging with total strangers and coming home and they like are like featured like slap dab right in the middle of something I'm writing,
Hmm.
because they're the ones to deliver that story. So it's always like who's going to tell this story?
Yeah.
Who's going to carry this poem? When I'm working with young people, I tell them that I love the way some words taste in my mouth. There's some words I just love rolling around on my tongue. And there's some words I don't like. I don't like the word nice. It is so
Hmm.
intimate. Like, what is nice? You know, it's absolutely like, I don't know. It's like on the lowest of the food chain of words, like nice. You know, and then there are other words that just fascinate me. You know, when I say fascinate, they feel good inside of your mouth, like sunshine,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
or let me think of another one that I really like. I love the word glacier. You
That's a great word.
know, so having, you know, people think different about language, having a very visceral experience with it. So when you're writing, you're not using, you know, like that your language is not so limited, that you're expanding your language. And I attribute that to my grandmother and to my mother's middle sister. My mother's sisters were teachers, as most of the people in my family were and are. And summer was not a time of vacation for me. It was a time of, the dictionary was placed in my hand, and I had to every day find
Mm.
20 new words that I'd never heard of, that I didn't know. And they couldn't be easy words. And then I had these two cousins who had come down from New York, and they were really smart. And Jimmy and I were really close. And we would dictionary duel, like every day, you know, and I knew it was coming for the 2 week vacation. And I had to savvy up, you know, level up on my dictionary skills. But I
Mhm.
don't think we do this anymore. And even now, I find myself constantly like, what's another word for celestial? What's another word for freedom? You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
um, finding language, holding language, repurposing language. And also, you know, the vernacular of the South,
Mhm. Mhm.
not forgetting it, not erasing it, not condemning it, not belittling it, but
Mhm.
who we are as a Southern culture and the richness inside of that. There's so much language inside of that.
Absolutely. So you're talking about the deliciousness of words. Were there particular author voices or inspirations that drew you to the written word, educators, or any of those people that you can point to as sort of the lighthouses of what would be?
I would say that my North Star as a child was listening to the stories of elders.
Mhm.
Um, Sunday morning to me was a poetry festival.
Mm.
You know, the pomps, the circumstance, the pageantry, the festivity of worship, um, prayer, songs, nuance, paying attention to, you know, there were characters in my church growing up
Mhm. Mhm.
uh, that I literally would write about. you know. So it was there where I really fell in love with the power and cadence of language. I mean, I fell in love also in school. I was a very active reader, and my library was pretty big as a child and loved going to the library and to the public library. But it was really on Sunday mornings when I saw those words come alive.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
saw language enlivened, enlarged. I could see, like I knew what purple was. I knew the dance of purple. I knew what it smelled like. I knew what it tasted like.
mhm,
I knew what red was. I knew what white was. That they were beyond colors. That they were whole landscapes for me to step into. And I still embrace language that way. I wanna connect with the viscerality of language. What's the spirit of a word? Knowing the etymology of a word so you really know where that word comes from.
mhm,
Um, I love the word ekphrastic. I do a lot of ekphrastic writing, and I love that word. It just means to describe.
mhm,
But thinking about that word and thinking about the source of that word and the origin of that word. So I would say Sunday morning was really a place. When I think of the geography, and the nuance of kind of where I've shown up as a
mhm,
poet, being able to, I feel like the poet's job is to glean. We're all gatherers, and it's to glean. So, like we bring all the produce inside and then we glean for the best. We glean for the juiciest. We glean for the ripest. And that 11 o'clock morning on Sundays was my field.
mhm.
I went to gather.
Love it. Love it. It sounds only natural that poetry would be the way that you would go about expressing love of language, because poetry is so much about the the intentional, specific choice of particular words that you only have so many to place in a stanza. So that links really nicely. I said nice, sorry. Uh, to the way that you have chosen to go about composing.
Yeah, I have a dance background, and there are days that I mourn not still being on stage, not becoming more and more of the dancer I wanted to be.
Hmm.
But I realize, like on the days when I'm like totally clear that this is my dance,
Hmm.
that it is
Hmm.
my dance, that uh my love, like my love language is movement. And that's what I try to show up with the poems on the page, is when I'm writing, I'm really hearing the dip and the reach, the lift. you know I know where my hands are. Sometimes when I'm writing, I see the choreography of the poem happening right in front of me.
Hmm.
So when I'm reading, I'm hoping that I'm invoking the musicality of that poem, the flight of the poem, right? Or the sorrow inside of the poem, or the joy inside of the poem, or the brokenness inside of the poem. All of the things that a dancer does with the body.
Hmm.
And so poetry, this kind of poetic extension of my body, it's just kind of been an organic, natural process, or natural flow for me. So I realize I am dancing. I
Hmm.
am dancing. Some people are architects. Some people are chefs on the page. They're very precise and with their measurements and calculations, and um, connectors.
Hmm.
And uh, if you're paying attention, you can almost see the embodiment of kind of how people function in their
Hmm.
writing craft. Um,
Hmm.
there's the pilot, there's a gardener, And that's been important for me because what's most important when I'm working with people, and especially young people, I remember how as exciting and wonderful and nurturing as poetry has been to me in my life, as a child, it also terrified me.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, not a child, but in my teens I've been writing since I was a very young child. And when I became a teenager, I left North Carolina at the advent of desegregation. I was kicked out of public schools in North Carolina
Hmm.
for questioning injustice inside of the public school that I was assigned to. Was kicked out of that public school, landed in a Quaker boarding school in Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
Totally alienated from everything I knew. Uh, Took me a while to find my biorhythm in this new place, this new space, with people from all over the world whose stories did not align with mine.
Hmm.
Um, and why am I telling you this story? Um, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Um, it was a question of what linked you to poetry.
Right. So yeah. So I was frightened by how much I wrote. I
Hmm.
mean, I was filling notebooks, like on a daily basis. There was so much going on in my spirit, in my head, in my heart around trying to understand this newness of integration, this newness of, for the first time in my life, not feeling totally protected,
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
newness of of difference, not better or worse, but just different. And I was writing about it, and also uh, the identity issues that I was suffering as a young person, like too black over here, but too white over here,
Hmm.
and not knowing where my space was, where my place was. And it was poetry that saved my life,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
between those liminal spaces of all of that reckoning, trying to come to make some peace with living in Pennsylvania in a totally different environment than going back Thanksgiving to North Carolina. And, like the minute you get off the airplane, it's like suddenly like, oh, I'm home.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, places tell you where you are.
Hmm.
And North Carolina reminded me what it was, what it is. So that experience was very powerful for me. And inside of that experience, I wasn't sure I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I knew I didn't want to stop writing. And there's a difference. One
Hmm.
doesn't
Hmm.
have to become a writer to write.
Agreed.
One does not have to, you know what I'm saying, embrace that clothing. I'm always writing. If I never publish another book, I will always write. So I think it's very, very important. Language is important that way, that we are very careful about who we allow to validate, who we allow to mute, erase, or invisible our voices or
Hmm.
our beings. So at that time in my life, writing was a weapon. It was my power keg. It was the significant rabbit hole that I could go into and and rearrange history,
Hmm.
have conversations with history. I hope that makes sense.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
yeah, I just wanted to kind of like connect this to the younger me, the younger writer, the person becoming the writer that she did not know she was going to become.
Hmm. Yeah. With that idea of poetry as dance, I'm curious about The River Speaks of Thirst and what that project is. And I know it's on your website and people can check it out, but anything that you'd like to share about that?
Certainly. In 2019, some musician friends contacted me about creating an album. I was all for an LP, a vinyl LP. I was like, me, a vinyl LP? Yeah, let's do it. I was totally out of my comfort zone. Um, and we decided we would not go into a very formal studio. We did this in the living room of my my friend's house. And you can
Hmm.
only do this when you know what you're doing. And these two young men like are extraordinary technicians and engineers. With Mr. Sinatra, the cat, leaping off of my podium every 5 minutes when I was reading. Um, but it was a very powerful experience for me to capture my poetry on a CD and an album. And I knew that I did not want the entire CD to be my voice. I thought this would become very monotonous very fast. So I was very fortunate to have the voice of Nina Freelon, who is a Grammy nominated musician who last night we actually went to see her perform with the Paper Hand Puppet show, where she does my poem, The River Speaks of Thirst. And
Hmm.
that poem anchors that album, which is the title of that album. Um, Charlotte Ammons, who's an amazing poet slash musician, does one poem on that album. A poem that I wrote that I feel is a spoken word poem, and I'm not a spoken word reader. So she rearranged, she laid the beats, she recorded that song. And then my dear friend CJ Sewitt, who is the former poet laureate, he was the first poet laureate of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. CJ speaks another poem on that album. Uh, that's what is it called? No Poetry. No Poetry. And I always heard a man's voice reciting No Poetry.
Hmm.
And he does a beautiful job of it. And then a dear friend of mine, Jennifer Evans, who's an amazing vocalist, lays down some riffs on the first song, which is a Juneteenth poem. So it was a lot of fun. And surprisingly to me, we got a lot of really good feedback and accolades from, like I don't even know the industry, but all of these music critics who placed it on some of the best lists that year for best new albums. So
Hmm.
I'm very proud of that piece. Yeah, a lot of choreography going on in that work. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. So by means of a final official question, and then we can touch anything that we've missed. Being someone who teaches in North Carolina, who was taught in West Virginia, taught in Tennessee, curious about any message that you would share with the young voices, young creators out there, that are part of this region, as well as maybe even those looking in.
Well, to get out of their heads,
Mm.
to go out and experience the world around them, and to find whether it's your poetry or short stories or whatever you're writing, go find it. It's there. I like working with young people around found poems,
Mhm,
the
mhm,
poems that show up at the bottom of the salad bowl, the poems that are hiding under your bedroom in the bed, the poems inside of your gym shoes. Like they're there and they're just waiting for you. And to somehow make your fear work for you.
mhm,
It's very intimidating to speak your truth. It's very intimidating to speak your truth, especially in a culture that censors, that erases, um, that doesn't really uplift the worth of the artist.
mhm,
So don't be deterred by that. Again, I went back to, I said, be careful about who you look to validate you.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
It's not the big publisher who validates you. I remember when I published my first book, and I remember taking my son to the barbershop. And I remember I walked in, and like all the men in the barbershop, they were like, "Oh, I've seen your book. When I have your book." They were so excited about the book. And I remember the barber said, "I love your book, though I have no idea what you're talking about. But we're very proud of you." And in that moment, I realized It's the people who know you, it's the people who know your story.
Hmm.
It's the people who
Hmm.
are part of your story. Not the professor. I remember a professor who used to who used to critique my work. And he didn't have a frame of reference for it. So the article would always be about my person. Oh, Jaki Shelton Green, once again, showed up at the festival in all of her colorful regalia. She was just resplendent in this beautiful purple and orange and green dress and da 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 da. And he never talked about the work.
Uh-huh.
And I
Uh-huh.
realized it took me for a while to realize he couldn't talk about the work because he did not have a frame of reference for the work. None whatsoever. He did not have any frame of reference for the work. Now, as a Southerner, I know that what goes bump in your dark goes bump in my dark. I know that. I know what that is. We can name it.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
all of those pregnant, silent pauses that Southerners have. We know the language. We can translate it. We've always known what bless your heart means.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So those translations are so important that the people writing about you, the people critiquing you, the people deciding your worth on a page, that they know who you are. They know the source of what you write. Because if you don't know about squishy mud walking across a tobacco field at 6 o'clock in the morning in bare feet, or picking okra when there's still dew on it, then you certainly can't tell me if my poem about okra is a good poem if you've never had okra. And I
Hmm.
might be being a little facetious here, but what I'm saying is that I hope young people, can trust themselves, is find that way to trust. We're all athletes. I think about the athlete. The athlete knows his stuff, knows her stuff, and they show up at it. And we have to be those same athletes, because we are jumping and reaching and volleying, and dribbling
Hmm.
all kinds of balls as writers. So for me, it's about, you know, take a summer and just read anybody who you would never read in your life. Take a
Hmm.
summer and read Egyptian poets. Take a summer and go discover Vietnamese poets. Take a summer and read Chilean short stories. Take a summer and read nothing but Italian novels. You know, like, cross some borders and find yourself in all of these spaces that you would never imagine that one we belonged in or that we could find ourselves in, because we are everywhere. The humanity of all of us is everywhere, and we shouldn't limit it. And because for me, the writing process is not just about craft, it's about being, showing up
Hmm.
inside of that space, and what it means, excuse me, what it means every day to sit down. And some days you sit down and you don't write, but you sit down anyway. Some days you sit down and you wonder why you're not writing, but sit down anyway. And that's the advice I would feel, is like, find the tables that support you, find the tables that are going to praise you, find the tables um that see you
Hmm. Hmm.
and that can validate the work that you want to do. So I hope that's helpful.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. Love the idea of thinking about writing as writing on the way to writing. And I love that idea of the difficulty of critiquing the taste of something that you've never eaten, but people try to do that all the time.
Yeah, we had this conversation just the other night with my 5-year-old granddaughter or something. And she's like, "Oh, it's so nasty. I don't like that." And I was like, "But you've never tried it."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Or a guy who was here, a friend's husband was here for dinner Saturday night, and what was he? I could tell he was not sure about the asparagus. He was not sure, you know, about the Brussels that I cooked in coconut oil. He's like, "Coconut oil?" And I was like, just try it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was skittish, but he kept going back for it. Was funny. Like, he started with like one little teaspoon and he kept going back for more. And I was making that analogy, like, that's what life is.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
One spoonful at a time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for a wonderful talk and glad to share about your work. Your voice will be part of my classroom this coming year and will continue to be. And I'll be sharing this back around with you.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a happy writing season.
You do the same. Thank you.
Okay, take care.